Thanks to the good care of the girls, Alain recovered quickly, and the only effects left of his ordeal were stiff muscles and scars on his shoulder, from where the bullet had entered and exited. He stayed with them in their pod until he was fully healed, and felt some regret when he returned to his own, but he still had a job to do. "Did you do anything with the guys we trapped?" he had asked, and the girls shook their heads. "I'll go and take care of that first, then." "We'll help," said Asitha. Alain gave her a gentle smile. "No need, I can handle this on my own. You have dealt with enough already, so I won't burden you with this." Asitha opened her mouth, but Alain stopped her before she could speak. "Don't worry." She nodded a little and Alain set out for his pod in the Walkyria. Even though there was no need, he still drew his gun before he opened the door to the secure room in the warship. The two suits hung motionlessly in the vacuum. With a line attached to each suit, Alain pulled them along to an exit and pushed them into space. The view he got at the next group they had trapped wasn't as serene as the first. Blood drifted through the corridor and stained the walls and the bullet-riddled suits. Alain suspected the men went over the edge when their air supply went out and turned on each other. Careful not to touch the floating blood, he used the line again and set the suits adrift into space. Although he hadn't mentioned it, he went to the Lady Wind and assessed the situation. He almost found satisfaction in the shredded faces of the men he found at the airlock and the one in a corridor towards the engine controls. He shut down his mind before it imagined the carnage and what the men must have gone through. Although there were plenty of practical reasons to keep the ship and most of its contents, he had no desire to keep mementos of those murderers. Restoring drive control was a simple task after he turned off the probing program, running through the radio connection, and set an automated course towards the sun. He went back to his pod, executed the command remotely, and watched the ship's thrusters firing and maneuvering the ship towards its final destination. The girls come over later after their work shift, and Asitha gestured at where Lady Wind used to be. "Did you?" He nodded. "I got rid of it." She averted her eyes as tucked in her tail and flattened her ears. "You saw?" "Yeah." Tynus fiddled with her fingers, but Alain took their hands in his. "How about some human junk food? It goes well with drinking." Asita chuckled once. "Yeah, sounds good." Alain went to work with Asita while Tynus set up the rest and went looking for something to watch, avoiding anything with violence this time. The comedy series and the joy of eating something bad but so very tasty helped relieve the stress, and soon they were in stitches when the captain of an explorer vessel had another public row on the bridge with her ex-husband and first officer. Asita giggled at a scene where she rewarded him by petting him like a dog. She nudged Tyness. "That reminds me of that time when Alain pet your head." Tyness's eyes went wide and she blushed, while Alain blushed as he glanced at her. "It was more or less an automatic reaction," he said. "It helped, though," chuckled Asitha. "I bet she'd be skipping around if circumstances were better." Tyness hit her playfully on her arm. "I'll bet you'd get jealous and demand the same treatment." "Hey, I'd at least demand a treat for letting him pet me," said Asitha and smirked. Alain laughed. "You sound just like what we expect from a cat. Us humans exist to serve them, and as a reward we get to look at them and on occasion touch them, even worship them as royalty." Asitha grinned mischievously at him. "Really? That's a great idea," she said and held out her glass. "Fill me up, and maybe I will let you pet my head once." He laughed again and rubbed his cheek. I grew up with cats, so I'm not easy. I demand at least an additional stroking of your tail." Asitha narrowed her eyes. "You are tough indeed," she said and looked at her glass. "Only if you throw in more of those. What were they called, bacon crisps?" Alain folded his arms and looked gravely. "All right then, you have a deal this time," he said and hopped out to the storage closet to grab another bag of snacks. When he returned, Asita had scooted over to his seat at the side of the couch and pat on the middle seat between her and Tyness. Just to give Tyness room for her own negotiations. He laughed, sat down, poured their drinks, and handed Asita a bowl with her payment of bacon crisps. "There you are, your majesty. Very well, human, you may pet my head and tail once," she said and laid her tail across his lap. "Thank you so very much," he said and stroked her soft fur on her head once and ran his fingers through her fluffy tail. "Your fur is really nice." Asita felt a nice shiver going through her and giggled. "You've done well, human." Alam bowed his head to her. "It was my honor," he said, and noticed Tynus had laid her tail on his lap as well. She looked into her glass. "I want some of those crisps as well." Alan smiled and filled a bowl for her. "Your Majesty," he said as he handed it to her. Tynus giggled and blushed. "Thank you," she said, and leaned her head towards him. He stroked it gently and ran his fingers through her thick tail. "I had been wondering, but I never imagined your tail was this soft and bouncy." Tynus blushed. "Thank you." Asita put up a pout. "Are you saying her tail is better than mine?" Alan chuckled. "I'm saying you both have fur that is soothing to stroke." Asita grinned. "All right, you may touch it more if you want to, just for today." "Mine too," said Tynus. Alan smiled. "How could I refuse such an offer?" he said, and stroked their tails while they continued watching the comedy series. All three stood at the airlock lockers at the end of their break, and Asita turned around to Alan before she stepped into her suit. "I'm really glad you're alive," she said, and hugged him tight. His heart skipped a beat at the sudden affection, and he hugged her back. "I'm glad you two are alive." Tynus hugged him after a slight hesitation. "Tell us if you ever get hurt like that again. Don't make us worry." He smiled softly. "I will." The girls stepped into their suits, and Alan watched them until they were out of sight, crossing the impact zone. "The fuckers," grumbled Alan when he read the latest message he received sometime later. "Bad news?" asked Asita over their channel. He sighed. "I just got word that an inspection drone is coming with the next cargo drone. As if sending me here to get me out of their hair wasn't enough. Now they want to keep a tab on what I do." "You were in their hair?" asked Tynus. Alain chuckled. "It means I was a bother to them." He went over his current situation in his mind and what he should hide from the drone, because he knew the higher-ups would try to take away the few good things he had here. "Alain, are you all right?" asked Asita. He put his thoughts on hold for a moment. "Yeah, but I'll need to do a few things before the drone gets here. I'll tell you when I see you later." Tynus looked at the written list on the table in Alain's pod. "What's all this?" "Things I need to do to hide how well I'm doing here, second," he said. "If my boss finds out he sent me to a better place than I worked at, he'd make sure to ruin it for me." "Is he that bad?" asked Asita. Alain leaned back in the couch. "He's rather vengeful. This whole thing started because things were a mess at work, and I had a heated discussion about it with my incompetent manager. He tried to get rid of me, but I was too good at my work to easily replace, and they couldn't fire me just like that. So they ignored me as much as they could. But then they had word about negotiations for dismantling these warships and realized they needed to send someone who was both capable and expendable. The perfect choice was me." Asita let out a tired chuckle. "Same story here. You probably know how strict our society is when it comes to how males and females behave," she said, and slumped in the couch next to him. "I didn't like what they expected of me. I don't submit myself to any male. They're not better than me. I was bullied while I grew up, but I fought back and had them acknowledge me as one of the best engineers at school, just in time for me to be assigned to this job." "Same story everywhere," grumbled Alain. Asita looked at Tynus. "Want to share how you got here?" Tynus sighed. "I don't deal very well with males either, ever since I was little," she said, and fiddled with the hem of her shirt. "I worked at a company with ties to the government, and I knew there were many males who took interest in me because of my looks, and the director was one of them. One day when I worked late and alone at my desk, he made advances while he'd clearly been drinking too much, and I pushed him away. Unlucky for him, he tripped over several cylinders lying on the floor and broke his ankle, and I had to call for medics. Not much later, I was assigned to this work, telling me they needed capable people, but I know the project leader is a close friend to the director." "Sounds like he wanted to shut you up before everyone found out what he did to you," said Alain. Tynus nodded. He sighed and went to the drinks closet. "Let's drink to the selfishness of people in power. After this, I need to decouple this pod." "Decouple? Why?" asked Asita. "If they find out how cushy I made it here, they'll invent regulations to take it away. I'll need to make them think I have it worse out here, so they'll feel smug and won't bother me again." Asita nodded and her ears drooped slightly. Then we won't talk for a while. Yeah, the drone will probably monitor all channels so we can't use ours without them finding out, said Alain, and slumped into the couch with a bottle and glasses. Better enjoy what we have while we can. I'll make an extra rich meal for us today. Alain was grateful for Asitha's and Tyness's help in decoupling the large emergency pod from the crew pod and storing it into a corner of a small cargo bay nearby, just in time before the inspection drone arrived. He cycled the airlock of the pod to let the fairly oblong and standing straight-up drone moving on 6 spider legs inside. The main body of the drone came up to his hips, but it had a swiveling cubicle head on an extending pole housing the cameras, which reached up to his shoulders. "Greetings," it said in an emotionless, synthetic female voice. "I am Cassandra and will monitor working circumstances to comply with regulations falling under sections 73B and 112F of working in space. At least it's not an annoyingly cheerful AI like some drones are equipped with," thought Alain. He looked straight at the camera head. "I am Alain Moreno, 853-8087-254-676. Identity confirmed. I will begin monitoring for the next 10 standard days." 10 days. Alain thought and looked at the date clock on the wall. The list I made with the worst jobs should help make time pass quickly. He took the order list from the side table and held it up. The day begins with making the list of parts and the place they might be recovered at. He spent some time going through the blueprints to confirm locations and put on his suit when he was done. Time to get to work. The location of the circuit on the list was at one of the worst damaged sections, and he needed to crawl through a crumpled corridor to get to the compartment. The drone barely managed to follow him, and it watched as he forced panels open to find out the circuit was smashed. "This one's a goner," he said as he held up a few burnt pieces for a good view. "This is the state of a lot of the systems in and around the impact zone." He led the drone around all day, and at the end, he leaned back into the corner seat of his pod while waiting for a random food container to warm up in the oven. He had recovered enough systems to match his usual recovery rate, and below that of the expected rate as set by the company. He'd have to give up some sleep for the time being, but it was necessary to complete the picture he wanted to portray. He ate quickly, and the drone went into mandatory privacy mode when he went to sleep. Tyness sighed while she stirred her food. "Not hungry?" asked Asitha. "I feel sorry for Alain. While we have enough of the good stuff for a while, he's stuck to eating the boring food." Asitha nodded. "Still, it's better than what we used to eat, so it won't be as bad for him." "It's not just that. It's also the fun to cook and eat together." Asitha smiled a little. "Yeah, I miss that as well," she said and chuckled. "It's funny how quickly we got used to being around him. A human, on top of that." Tyness giggled. "Maybe because he is human. I can't imagine a Sylph male like him." "I'm sure there are, but they're very hard to find," said Asitha and took a bite and chewed. "You might have to go to remote places like in a forest to meet any." Tyness chuckled. "I think I can imagine him living in solitude in the wilderness." "Oh, like that man in the movie where he rescued a woman who was chased by people trying to kill her?" Tyness chuckled. "Complete with wild animals for friends." "If it were us, he wouldn't need separate animal friends and women to rescue," Asitha said, and the image stuck in her mind, as it did for Tyness. She cleared her throat. "But then we likely wouldn't need rescuing." "Yeah," said Tyness. "I hope the drone won't pester him for long." Asitha nodded lightly. "We can only wait for it to leave." Alain trudged along the hull, Cassandra following him as it did since its arrival. He really felt the tiredness from the lack of sleep getting to him, but he had to keep up the act of working most of the time to give the impression to his old manager that he was worse off, and thus ensure his leisurely life afterwards when they would no longer bother him. He made today interesting by seemingly getting lucky when all tasks were easy. That way he could show he used the leftover time to get extra rest. Asitha and Tyness stepped out of their pod in the distance, and he wanted to greet them, but he had to ignore them to hide his contact with them. The sight of them did make him feel a little better, and the thought of being together with them later sent a shiver of excitement through him. He chuckled silently and glanced at the probe floating next to him, while he wondered how much of a shock it would cause if both sides found out how well they got along. He looks really tired, sighed Tynes. Yeah, said Asitha. He doesn't move with his usual energy. I wish we could cheer him up somehow without that probe finding out. Not much we can do. We can't even leave a good meal because the probe would record it. The girls moved on towards their scheduled jobs until Tynes grabbed Asitha's arm. But there is something we can give him without anyone finding out but him. Alam returned to the pod after another shift, did the administration in a roundabout way, ate and called it an end before heading into his small crew quarters to sleep. He undressed, slipped under the bed covers, and yanked his foot back when he touched something hard and cool. He pulled away the covers and stared at the bottle of tequila. Did I put that there while I was drunk? He muttered. The nutty brown color of the liquid inside didn't match the label, and it puzzled him even more. The cap seal was broken, and he unscrewed it to take a sniff at what was inside. He clamped his mouth to stifle his sudden laugh. You girls, he chuckled and took a swig from the mushka. The burn went down his throat and filled it with warmth. If you were here, I'd kiss you. He thought and sat down on the edge of his bed, staring at the bottle. I really do want to be with them. Huh? How weird is that? He took another swig from the soothing liquid and crawled under the covers to sleep. Alan slumped back into the seat of the Sylph pod. It's gone. Finally. Asitha chuckled and put a full plate of the best food they had in front of him. I have to admit, I'm glad it's gone as well. It's just better when it's the three of us. He chuckled. Yeah, I missed you too, he said and sniffed the scent of the fried meat. And after that, decent cooking, good liquor, and watching movies on a good media system. Tynes giggled. At least we come first. He smiled. There's no way you wouldn't come first. Besides, if I make you hate me, I won't get to use that fantastic shower of yours. Jerk, said Tynes and hissed playfully at him. Asitha hit his shoulder. Just so you know, we only tolerate you because we can use your kitchen. Alain sniggered. Sounds like we're already the best of roommates, he said and took another bite. Might as well hook up my pod to yours so we don't need to cross the ships each time. Tynes imagined the situation and excitement filled her stomach. She liked the idea of the three of them hanging around together in their free time without the hassle of going back and forth. She glanced at Asitha and knew she'd been thinking along the same lines. Asitha tapped one claw on the table. Would that even be technically possible? Said Alain. I saw hatch adapters on the Walkyrea to link between our and your ship's airlocks and hatches for boarding purposes. I'm sure there are some on the Amaroth as well. He gestured at the crew pod's side and the opposite side. Both of our pods have opposite hatches that can be linked with such an adapter. Power systems aren't compatible, but since they're redundant, there's no reason to connect those. If needed, we could always wire up a connection from one side to the other. He looked up in thought. The whole thing is actually quite easy to set up, now that I think about it. If there are cross-sections on board as well, it's even possible to connect 4 pods together. He drew with his finger on the table. Hook them up in a cross with an adapter if needed, and 2 can be used as bedrooms to separate sleeping from the rest. One could create a whole community home by linking pods through these cross-sections. The possibilities are nearly endless because they can also be stacked and you can go up and down along the ladders inside them. Asitha looked at Tynes. I think 4 will be enough. That would give each of us 1 pod with private space for ourselves when we keep allowance for everyday use. Alain nodded. That would cover all our needs, yes, he said, and took another bite, then almost choked when the meaning of her words became clear. She pat his back until he swallowed his bite and breathed freely again. You'd like to hook our pods together and build a shared home for us 3. Asitha grinned. You said it yourself, there are advantages to living together. Alain looked at Tynes, who nodded a little and blushed. I was only thinking of the technical aspects. Doing it means we'll live together as 2 different species. Aren't we already living together in a way? Said Asitha. You come over here to relax in the shower, we come over to cook, eat, and relax on your couch. Alain looked at his plate. Yeah, you're right. I guess I'm so used to the current situation, it doesn't feel like the life-altering decision of going from living on my own to sharing a home. He chuckled. I guess it won't make much of a difference, apart from eliminating the current inconveniences. Asitha leaned back in her seat. All right, let's find out if we can find 2 more suitable pods and build a new home for ourselves. The three went around together on the warships and found another suitable emergency pod on both the Walkurayan and the Amaroth, and the cross-sections with several hatch adapters. To create a sense of neutral ground and keep things easy for everyone, the four large pods were connected like a four-leaf clover above the wreckage of the impact, with the two original crew pods on top of them connected through the two cross-sections at the center. Alan fixed the nearby connections to the Walkurayan for backup power and air supply, while Asitha and Tynes did the same on the Amaroth for backup power. Asitha inhaled deep in their newly built home. "This is so much better than the synthetic scrubbers." "Definitely," said Alan. "I'll show you the two gardens that I revived to get this naturally fresh air later." Tynes chuckled. "You won't have to smell our animal scent everywhere now." "Oh, I didn't mind," he said. "I even thought it was somewhat comforting, reminding me again of my young days with the cats around the house." She blushed and Asitha sniggered. "And now you have once again a home with two large cats." He grinned. "Yeah, life is good." "Home again," said Alain when he entered the living, as they decided to call it, days later. "Hey," said Asitha while she updated the inventory for their cargo drone. "Had a good catch. Just one set of valves that gave me trouble because all the high-pressure pipes were bent and put force on them. The rest was easy. I had plenty of time to tend to the garden, but now I'm covered with dirt," he said and chuckled at his black fingernails. "I never imagined I'd be digging in the dirt in space." Asitha chuckled. "You can use my shower. Tynes is returning soon." "Thanks," he said, picked up fresh clothes from his new personal pod, and went to the pod formerly used by both girls and which had been turned into Asitha's personal pod. He entered the shower and relaxed in the weightless mist of water. Tynes climbed down the ladder later. "I'm done." "The two circuits?" asked Asitha. "Stored in the cargo pod. The container was full enough to load it." "Good work." "I'm going to freshen up," Tina said and headed for her pod. "I'm getting hungry." She took a quick dry air shower where streams of air blew through her fur, then began brushing herself. "Shaz!" she cursed when the handle of her brush came loose. She pushed it back, but it came loose again, laid it aside, put on a fresh shirt, and went to Asitha's pod. "I'm going to borrow your brush. Mine just broke," she said to Asitha. "All right," said Asitha, while she calculated the yield from the Amaroth for the period. She looked up at once when she realized what Tynes did. "Wait, Alan is in the shower." Tynes didn't need the warning anymore when Alan stepped out of the shower. He covered himself quickly with his towel. "Not again," he sighed. "I was just borrowing Asita's brush," Tynes said as she blushed. She picked up the brush quickly from the shelf next to Alan and hurried out. Asitha almost bumped into her and chuckled at her embarrassed face. "I guess you just found out what I saw that time before." Alan walked out of her pod. "Don't blame me for any nightmares you'll get." Asitha sniggered. "Who said we'd get nightmares? Maybe it's you who has to worry about that." He grinned as he passed her. "Being seen naked by two pretty female creatures won't give me nightmares. That only brings me pleasant dreams." Asitha chuckled, but blushed just as much as Tynes while she returned to the couch. His remark came back to him when they were lounging after their meal, and he realized how easygoing the girls had become around him. They laid their tails across his lap for him to stroke and casually leaned against him as if they had always done so, and it had felt just as natural to him lately. Coming back to their shared pods after work on the Walkurayan had really become coming home for him, and the girls were an important part of it. He glanced at Tynes and Asitha, giggling at the animated superhero getting stretched to her limit, and the stronger pounding in his chest made him aware of what had sneaked up on him. He couldn't deny that he'd become very attracted to the both of them. He took a gulp from his drink, deciding he'd just wait and see how things would unfold over time. Alan hummed at the mess inside a first aid medical bay. In the Walkurayan, the control systems he had to retrieve were located at the back wall, but the corner where he needed to be was full of equipment thrown there by the impact. He was glad it was the last task on his list, and he put his tool case aside and began clearing the debris to reach the panel in the wall. Many smaller items like desk equipment, sample holders, small cases, and handheld scanners went flying through the medical bay when he pulled larger equipment away, but didn't get in the way of doing his job, and he returned home by the time he'd expected. The soft sound of grating glass caught his attention when he stored his tool case and he opened it up. "Crap," he said at the shards of a vial in one corner. "Must have drifted into the open case while I was busy." He thought and cleaned up the box before going down. Tynes smiled when he went to the kitchen corner, lured by the smell. "I found a stew recipe in one of the cookbooks and wanted to try it with what we have." He took a deep whiff of the scent from the large pan. "I'm sure it'll taste as good as it smells," he said and chuckled. "I almost feel sorry for all the men who miss out on this, but I'm selfish enough to want to keep these things for myself." He stole a slice of tomato. "And Asitha, of course. I don't think I would have left our solar system if I'd met you two before at my hometown." Tynes smiled and continued while Alain went to fill out his report for the day. "I might have not left either," she thought. "That was delicious," said Alain, after wiping his bowl clean with a piece of space bread. It wasn't exactly like real freshly baked bread, but it was close enough, and it could be preserved for a long time, which is why it was used in space where there was no access to the ingredients to make the real thing. "I'm looking forward to the next thing you'll try." Tynes giggled. "I don't know if it'll turn out good again." "You spoiled us with this, so it'll have to," he said and gave her a wink. She chuckled and poked his side. "Better watch out you won't turn into a large blob." "I don't mind as long as I can eat this well." "What was that movie called again? The Blob from Outer Space?" asked Asitha and smirked. "Don't diss culturally important movies," said Alain and grinned, then remembered one item he'd packed when he left Earth. "I just remembered something." The girls watched him gather their dirty dishes, dump them at the kitchen, leave for his pod, and return not much later with a small blue box. He pulled a data disk from the box, inserted it into the media system, and gave each of them a pair of gloves and short socks. "I was reminded of one of the first games that I played many a night until the morning whenever I could," he said while he donned his gloves and pulled the short socks over his feet. "It's a fantasy science fiction game, and one of the monsters you need to defeat to level up are slimes. Those space blobs come in small and large sizes." He noticed the blank stares at him. "It'll be easier to explain by showing you," he said and activated the game. "I'll skip to the moment where we as a group begin our adventure. The intro tells you you're on your own, or in this case, one of a group of friends who are hunted because they'd been sent an ancient artifact by a father who hasn't been seen since childhood. The goal is to evade the hunters while growing stronger and gaining weapons by performing tasks for the life forms we meet during our travels through a giant maze world. Eventually, we'll learn the truth and what we need to do to save not just ourselves, but more." The screen flashed to a dim steel hall with broken equipment and components from electronics and machinery strewn around in the view of three figures in casual clothing. Alain shuffled his feet and the middle one moved forward. "To walk, you just need to press forward with your feet as if you're walking." He leaned forward and reached out to the floor. On screen, the figure picked up a piece of pipe. "The gloves control the hands." He made a throwing motion and the pipe flew forward. "Go ahead and try it. This is a safe spot to try out moving, and when you get the hang of it, I can show you how to change your character to any of the species available in the game." Asitha and Tynes moved around and quickly found out they could throw stuff at each other without the character getting hurt, and laughed out loud while trying to defeat Alain, who evaded and tripped them easily. He grinned wide when the girls gave up eventually and panted slightly from the effort. "All right, looks like you got the hang of using the controls. Now we can customize our characters." The screen split in three views, one above the other two, side by side, and he guided them through the options, and Tynes chose a slender, fair-skinned alien species with seductive curves and a tight black outfit, while Asitha chose a clunky buff robot, its dark paint job faded by time, rust, and grime, and Alain chose a humanoid species with a half-canine face, large pointy ears, and a long thick tail. The shape of its chest underneath the tank top left no doubt about the gender. "You play a female character?" asked Asitha. "Of course," said Alain, while he chose shades of blue for the character's furry legs, arms, ears, and hair. "I told you I prefer looking at females. They're much cuter." Asitha chuckled. "Even my character?" He smiled. "This robot species is genderless, but even then, knowing it's you behind it makes it much better." The robot on screen moved as she punched him playfully against his shoulder. Just as long as it's female, eh? He shrugged. I'm not complex, he said and chuckled. He looked at Tynes. Why this species? Tynes smiled a little at her character. She's completely the opposite of me, and I wanted to be like that in the game. I see, although I don't think cute and sexy are opposites. Tynes blushed, but before she could say anything, Alain activated the first scene, and armed troopers in black rushed on the screen. It's impossible to fight these, so run, he said and quickly shuffled his feet to make his character run. Asita and Tynes quickly followed and fixed their attention to their characters as they fled the scene and ran through narrow corridors, stairwells, and watering systems. I can't hold out much longer, groaned Asita while she pinned the four-legged, elephant-sized and white creature against a wall. Just a little more, panted Tynes as she restrained the four chubby limbs growing out of the wailing creature's front with her coding magic force field. Alain jumped up via thick pipes running along the wall towards the flathead with two eyes on each side of the hole that was its nose, and rammed his short black carbon sword into the top of the creature's skull with a loud, sickening crack. The girls jumped back as the creature's wail faded and slumped forward, and Alain jumped away just before it struck the floor with a deep and dull thud. We did it, cheered Tynes and hugged Alain tight. We beat it. That was exhilarating, said Asita and slumped against the both of them in a tired hug. First that battle against those nimble and deadly service droids, then this monster. She stretched and groaned. It's been a long time since I moved this much, even if we did most from the couch. Alain chuckled. I know how you feel. I think this is even more strenuous than using the exercise harness. The game entices you to get up more from the couch with each challenge. Tynes sighed. I will definitely not wake up before the next shift. I'm sure I'll feel all my muscles later, Alain said while he stroked their backs. But the fun's worth it. He chuckled. It's even more fun than when I found the loophole and blasted through the game with an overpowered character. I vote we do this more often instead of the mandated exercises, said Asita. This is much better as well as more fun. I agree, said Tynes. It won't be long before I feel more fit than ever before if we do this daily. She looked up at Alain. Can we? Alain smiled. This game can generate a crap load of different opponents, so there's plenty to fight. Even then, I have several more games that will get your body moving. He looked up. And this is a nice motivation as well. Asita and Tynes pondered for a second before they both realized what he meant. Is that so, eh? Said Asita and hugged him tight. You want more? He laughed as he tensed to counter her tight embrace. I give, he said and grinned when she let go. At least until I gain a bit more strength. She poked his chest and smirked. That sounds like a challenge. Alain chuckled. I'll go train for it right away. I might just like that more than gaming. She smiled deviously and stretched. This is it for me, though. I'm going to enjoy a very good sleep. Tynes yawned. Same here. Then I bid you lovely partners in this adventure, sweet dreams, said Alain. If you re-attack by drones or monsters, though, you know whom to call for help. The girls giggled and went to their pods, while Alain poured himself one last drink to settle down, while he still felt their embraces and tried to block the thought of how their fur would feel against his skin. He downed the drink quickly and went to his pod before they'd see his growing physical condition. Sitha sat on the edge of her bed and giggled. Stupid, 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 she said to herself while she rubbed her thighs, then sighed and rolled onto the bed, giggling softly until she fell asleep. Tynes clutched her thick tail in front of her as she laid on her back in bed, smiling softly while smelling the faint scent of alum in her fur from all the stroking he'd done. There! Don't let it get away, said Alain to Tynes. Got it, Tynes said while she sent a quantum blast from her hand to the last of the large woodlouse-looking creatures that had attacked a group of people. Asita giggled at the disheveled state of her robot frame and the clothes on Tynes and Alain. That's some damage we took. You hardly have anything left to cover you. Alain stood proud. And this is why I play female characters. I have no desire to look at some bulky frame of an oversized male when I can enjoy the one perk of a rough fight. Tynus laughed at the stance of the female, whose private parts were barely hidden behind the convenient remains of her clothes. That just looks so wrong. Hey, I'm not afraid to show off my assets. Asitha took a swig from her glass. I think you might have been drinking too much during the game, she said and sniggered. Alain grinned wide. Meh, you're just jealous because you have none to flaunt around, he said, then noticed the furry pet of the people jumping around merrily in Tynus's direction. Watch out! It's going to jump up at you. Tynus looked up from her tattered outfit, just as the animal jumped at her and filled the screen. She yelped as she tripped backwards from the surprise. Ouch! She said as she rubbed her behind, then saw the shocked stares of Asitha and Alain. She looked down at herself to see her shirt had folded up to her waist and exposed her. You're not, said Asitha softly. Tears flew as Tynus jumped up fast and rushed to her pod. Alain sat down. I'm attracted to he thought, but so much cuteness, it couldn't be. He looked up at Asitha, staring towards the entrance and slowly removing her gloves. You didn't know? Not even a suspicion? She looked at him. No one told me, and as far as I know, all Tynus's information states gender as female, she said and looked at the entrance again. They would have never sent a male and female couple here in the first place. Nothing in her behavior hinted at her secret. What do we do now? Maybe it's better to wait and give her time. Alain nodded and stood up. Yeah, it's time to sleep anyway. Asitha nodded lightly. Sleep tight, she said and went to her pod. You too, said Alain and went to his, pausing for a moment to stare at Tynus's door. He crawled into bed thinking about every moment they had touched each other and could not fit what they discovered with Tynus. He also couldn't set aside what he felt for Tynus. He groaned and stuffed a pillow in his face when he knew he had no interest in men, but Tynus still seemed as cute as always to him. He sighed and went over the whole of the game, from the time when he had finished it on his own to keep his mind busy until he could fall asleep.